Okay. It literally took forever to get this going. So I'm like, per usual, like my start here is like a little, like just kind of unstructured. But this is the second to last. I was just thinking, I was like, this is literally the second to last video that is going to be this kind of sort of like chaos and disorder format of just reading out of the book without any structure. And let me see. I'm just going to change something in my settings right now. Neat. Okay. So we've got two more. The remaining sections in the manifestation, the creating and building, which are fulfilling commitments and physical symbols. And I'm probably going to do one last reading talking about the acknowledgments and the bibliography, just to kind of like put a bow on the intention of all of these readings to be like the start to finish reading of like, this is the creation, this is the production of the book. Along the way, it turned out to be like, this is what it's like, my experience practicing it. And, which has been, it's been exactly what I needed. So I didn't know what I needed. I started this process because I could feel like the pull of the sort of the kite, so to speak, of like the work that has the kind of like following the place where there's like energy and resonance. So, so here we are at the end of the creation and manifestation. And I will say that, for my process here, full disclosure, like it's actually this going from seventh all the way to one in reflecting on Parinama has been like, it's been pretty like messy for me. Like it's kind of kicked up a lot of stuff. And in the but it's also like opened up like new pathways for like the way forward. And I'm going to continue to do readings. I'm actually collaborating with someone to do a podcast, and I'm going to be doing readings, but they're going to be a bit more structured. So instead of me sort of like coming in hot like I'm right now, where it's just like I'm just reading off, just talking, I'm just talking. It's just like the camera comes in and I'm just like yakety yak, and I don't have any structure, and I'm kind of like, I'm going to read this part and I don't know what's going to come up. And initially it was like, I'm going to talk about what like my recollections from writing the book. And in like, it kind of, there's some of that in there, like especially in the earlier ones. And then it became a bit more about like what was sort of coming up in my own process with it. So, here we go. But so like for fulfilling commitments, so just as like, if this is the first reading, or this is the first like video you've watched in a while, just as a reminder, and it's always kind of worth like re-walking through these stages, even for me, like helps me kind of the repetition of like kind of refiling all these things and considering them as they relate to my process, that I'm like checking the microphone, that we start in the like hyperliminal space where it's like, we start with like no idea, but like a sense of angst, this sense of needing to create something. And, and this is where this really, for a lot of people, this is a place like, if you have shame, if you have like issues, like if sixth chapter, second hub, where it's kind of like, well, how should, and I've felt this, which is like, if I feel this urge to create and build stuff, then like, why on earth do I not have an idea? And I've had this conversation. I know this for me personally. I've had this conversation with incredibly high level executives. And it's this shame that's like, well, if I actually, like all these risks I want to take, all this feeling in myself that it's like there's something extraordinary for me to do, like deep down, maybe it's like, but the sense that it's like I've got a purpose and I really feel like an urge to be aligned with it. The fact that you don't know what it is can be a blocker that just holds back an entire process, like from being able to be initiated. And then, sometimes we're lucky enough to kind of stumble into it. And that's something, when I think of like my own life, that there's just been so much like fortunate stumbling into things. And now I'm actually trying to take a more active role in creating something that is less passive. And it's harder. It's harder. I'm not at the point yet where I'm like, it's harder, but it's like, it's harder. And one of the things I'm finding is like with the notion of resistance, the more that I start to like move into the resistance of how hard this is, the more the sort of escape routes start showing up. Like it's like, well, you could do this, you could do this, like old pathways that are passive and really easy versus like, and the thing that's Stephen Pressfield says, which is that if the stronger the resistance, the more, and which is like the sense of like kind of like how hard it is to push through, like moving against a gradient. Um, the stronger that is, the more important the work is. And that's also, I mean, that's something that's addressed in some of the singular videos that are at the top in the other section of this channel, which is like, how do I know what it is? Is it easy, or is it supposed to be easy, or is it supposed to be hard? Not going to talk about that here. But so in this first section here, where we're in this liminal space of of inquiry, we're just finding questions, and we're getting into a mode that's going to be supportive of absolutely everything we do, which is asking questions that we don't have the answers for, and like getting comfortable being uncomfortable with that, and enhancing our ability to be receptive and perceptive of the things that come our way, the insights that pop into your head where you go, oh my gosh. And it happens in a second. Like I had the thing, like one of the things for the podcast is like, in a sequence, like the sequence was, I'd been writing it as an intention. It was like on my list every week. I wrote podcast, podcast, podcast. And then I got I'll say Rachel sent me her podcast that she started, which is excellent. It's the commercial. Wait, oh, shoot! I want to use the proper. It's like the Real Estate Tech Insider. You can find it on Spotify. It's really good. And it's so she sent me them and I watched it, and there was a video component, and and like seeing the interaction that she had with her collaborator, I was like, oh, I know who I'm supposed to do my podcast with. And so this thing that's like, what do I do? What do I do? And it was like, boom, instantaneous. So this is part of the thing about receptivity, is that it's like, the idea of hard work in this stage is the hard work is doing no work. And it's really hard to trust. At least for me, I really struggle because it's like, well, I should be doing something. And that can kind of like block the focus of being able to kind of like open the aperture and see everything that is like possible, and like see the kind of signs and indicators that are coming in. So that's the seventh hub. Sixth hub, we crystallize the vision. So we start to like spend more time with it, like looking at it and watching it kind of come into focus. And this happens in a lot of different ways, but part of this also has to do with figuring out who you are relative to the project. So this is something where it's like figuring out, like once you get the reception, it's kind of like, well, who am I relative to this? Like, why is this meaningful for me? Why am I attached to it? Why does it make sense as it relates to the narrative about who I am? And that is where you get, first of all, like more clarification, and also like the support of getting additional direction of what you're like, that's going to sharpen the focus with it. Because you, as the captain of the project, it's really critical that you know who you are as it relates to it, which is actually something also I could like go down another tangent with. Now, so that's sixth hub. And like we're in the exercises that we do here, we're like tracking patterns, and we're looking back to, earlier eras of our lives where we were kind of a bit more free to be just like impractical. I'll call it impractical in terms of just like following the things that like naturally are the questions that arise, and the things that align with like who, like a deeper integrity about who we are. So after that, we have the fifth hub, which is about articulating what we're trying to create. and this is the process, exercises with that. And this is part of linking your relationship with it to your relationship with the world. And for manifesting and creating, I just want to keep emphasizing that as much as this has this like notion of being a singular like project, the reality of it is that what we're doing when we're manifesting is we're trying to bring something into collective reality. And it's often seen like I'm trying to bring something in for me, but ultimately what real actually this is a really good point to make, is that what we're doing is we're bringing something into the world for the world to respond to, that actually winds up giving us what, like what we seek. So there's actually like a transmission before there's a reception. So, and that's also something like that's a kind of a message for me, because like what, and so I'll just using some of my own examples. So, like when I got my first really like big job, I was still in college. I didn't know what I was going to do in college, and I was leading a trip that I had put together, fundraised, done all this stuff as the president of the like biology club, where I took, I think, like 13 or 14 students to Florida for marine biology research trip, which is pretty big, like, which is kind of like, a like entrepreneurial undertaking. But anyway, I mean, it was just a thing. It's just my nature. I'm kind of like a, builder, like I'm prolific, I guess, in a particular way. But the thing was, is like I wound up asking to be sat away from the people that I'd been like chaperoning when I was like technically their peer, but and I was just kind of tired of it. And they were having all these like drama. They were nerds that were getting like drunk and crying and stuff. And I'd been parenting for the whole time, and I was sort of ready to have a break. And so I asked to be seated away from them. And I was seated between, like an athlete and a recruiter. And the recruiter said, "Hey, have you ever considered pharmaceutical sales?" And I said, "What is that?" And he basically, it was like a cash grab essentially. And I was so poor. I mean, I had like pennies in my checking account, and, just like no brakes in my car, no health insurance, all that kind of stuff. Um, And so, like, the thing was, and he was like, "Well, as soon as you get home, send me your resume." And of course, I didn't have a resume. I got home and I like put it together and learned how to write a resume and all this kind of stuff. And so, I guess the point of this being in terms of like transmission is that it's like putting things out into the world that are like communicative about who you are, the kind of person you are. And that's something I've been like very low in doing personally. I'm taking ownership for that right now, which is this past year in terms of doing this has been really about, turns out, surprise, largely about my process. And the people I've worked with as it relates to Parinama have been really like kind of passive, like as we're almost like we're working together. And so now it's like, I think one of the things about like the creating and building part for me is like switching into like an era, I guess, that is like like stronger communication and representation. So this is fifth hub, which is like, okay, you're putting stuff out there, you're starting to communicate, you're starting to transmit with the world. And even if the message isn't clear, like you're putting something out for the world to react to, for you to actually like see and then kind of be like, "Oh yeah, that's not it." And then you iterate. So like the iterativeness of the process is so key. Like the attachment to like, if I'm going to put effort in, I immediately should be getting a result in return, is something that is like kind of one of the sort of traps of conventional working, which is like hourly work, salaried work, where it's like, it's disappointing, where it's like, I tried and it didn't work. Where it's like, no, and this is why we invest in the earlier aspects of the work of connecting to like ideas that come to us and light us up, and then connections to who we are in terms of the execution of them. That the importance of like finding the energy for it is that it matters to us. And so that part of like the iterativeness of really figuring out how to start to make the message connect and make sense to people. And so then we move down to the fourth hub, which is about connection. And this is where our communication is helping us figure out who we work with what we're doing, and who works with us to make it happen. Initially, it's usually about who we work with to make it happen. And those collaborations and what it means to establish high integrity relationships in those collaborations, being really aware. Like, for example, I'll say, like, for like in example of the podcast, it's like I want to do a podcast, but it is a collaboration. It's not a Parinama podcast. It's a collaboration. It's a 50-50. And kind of the, and like the, like really making considerations that have to do with like, how do I do this thing in a way that really lends to like my integrity, the people I work with is their integrity in terms of them getting, making their concessions, but also getting closer to, having greater yields for doing work that's aligned with their purpose, their mastery, their freedom, their autonomy. So there's that, and there's the exercises. If you're following along in the book, it's chapter 12. And then in the third chapter, it's just a lot of very conventional execution. It's just like showing up, consistency, like tasks. I mean, one of the things that I do, I think I've talked about this before, handling objections, delegating, planning, task management, accountability. I don't know where I talked. I think it might have been in there, but I have a tendency to like write, like, so I focus on the vision, uplift, hope, path, and then I'll write the things that are sort of, and it's just like I do it constantly, where I'm like making notes in a particular place about like the directionally where I'm trying to point. And a big one has been podcast, has been in this place. It's like actually right here where I write it. And it's kind of like, it's not so much the pressure to like do it. It's to be like, okay, I directionally want to explore this. And so, yeah. And so it makes me more receptive in ways that are subconscious, because the thing is that, it's not, it's synergy, and like the fact that there's already something kind of cooking, that where it's like when Rachel sends me that podcast, I watch it. I go, this platform's great. It has video in it. And watching it really inspires me because I'm seeing her really showing an aspect of herself that doesn't get like public exposure, which is her extraordinary insight that is like really incisive. It's really unique and incisive, and it comes from this like very particular place of being like incredibly perceptive and curious. And so it's like, it was very cool to watch that and be like, oh, I really see how this medium can do that, and how it works really well when it's two people, and how it works really well when there's video, and then just being really inspired. So anyway, so there, so we're talking about just execution stuff. And then in the second hub, and this is like one where, a very common one that gets skipped over, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it really has to do about like continuing to create resonance with what you're doing, to make your project actually something that resonates with other people who are going to use it, interface with it, benefit from it. That, there really is a place, like similar to writing a book, there's this threshold, like, and I forget about this, but it was like very potent at the time, where I'm in my manuscript with my editor, with my designer, with proofreader, layout, like the production people of the book. Like there's this like little insular group of us that are working on it. And there's a point in even the writing where it's like crossing over from like, this isn't my process. This is actually now about making sure what I'm doing is like really effective, is really intended for supporting the reader. And that was hard for me, because it's like sort of a crossing over, and people talk about like having a child and this kind of sense, and I think it's like having a child in the sense of like this relationship, this very intimate relationship with something you've created that actually like has its own life to live. And so that was part of it, where it's like I really have to service this in the sense of like making this easy to understand, easy to read, easy to digest, like in, what, like, and it's still, I mean, it's like it's a behemoth. The book is a behemoth, but hopefully it's like a bit more accessible with how it's like created and written. Um, but the crossing over to when it's like, this is now for the world. Part of it is like, another part of this is like, with that is like making it fun, because it's like making the work sustainable means that it needs to actually like feel good, like, or at least there need to be periods of feeling good, of like reward, of like joy, of like laughter, of, of lightheartedness. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable. I mean, it can give this sense of hyper productivity, but in terms of being able to like sustain an actual project, it's like you've got to like maybe 2 years in you on something that like has no breaks, no celebrations, no joy, no lightheartedness. So then where we are now is the first hub, which is about, very specifically about limitation. So everything that we've gone through goes from being like really spacious and like unlimited potential to actually potentiating a very singular vision. And this is the thing where people really struggle if they've been like really become attached to the notion that creation is like incredibly, like this idea that's incredibly expansive, where it's like part of creation is incredibly expansive, and then the actual like manifestation part is incredibly limited. And what I talked about, I think yesterday when I read this, was that it's like, to write this book, I had to give up a lot of stuff. It wasn't like, and then when I did start doing like working with a company and producing the book, I paid a significant price for it. It took me a very long time, arguably almost a year, almost until now, to really recover from the drain of working pretty much around the clock on two things that I was giving full attention to. And and so like the idea of like limitation, the idea of being like, no, it's like it really, like, we are finite in the sense of like what our energy, and what I was like taking from was like my life force. And so I've been recouping that over this last year as well. Like that's been part of my process that I've had to kind of really own, was that the drive to be doing all of these things simultaneously came at a cost of, I guess you could say, like a burnout, because when I finally was like, okay, I need to really eliminate and focus on question mark. I didn't realize how long it was going to take for me to really restore myself. And also, it happens that I was doing this practice, so I was like also transforming and optimizing. It's really interesting. Like, one of the things is that there's aspects of like the the shape of my body in ways that are actually more felt sense, where there used to be like stiffness and bottlenecks of like kind of, I'll call it stiffness. They're just chronic. I had them when I practiced yoga 2 to 3 hours a day, and they just never, they're just kind of like always there and just constantly being managed. And that through parinama practice, and I think it has to do with really addressing like the underlying sourcing and patterning of it, is that there's like a different mobility that I have in my body. I have no physical pain. That's one thing. And I don't want to be making any claims. I don't want to create any, like, I've been very reluctant to share some of this stuff, because it's like I don't want to like go into this thing where it's like, yeah, this will, like making like marketing style claims. But I will say that I have like I don't pain in my body. Like when people talk about being stiff, I'm not stiff. Like I'm like incredibly flexible. Even after being like immobilized by being sick, it's like I still have like incredible flexibility, and like, yeah, I don't know, it's hard, it's like it's wild. It's something that I didn't realize was possible. It's a little bit of a digression. But I guess as we're winding down these readings, it's like a little time for some reflection on the big picture of it. Another thing to think about is that I remember, and this is something I really wanted to recall and summon up again, was I remember there was, what was the Bo Burnham special, Inside, that I loved, that, one of the songs was, "Well, I feel like shit, dun, dun," like this little jaunty song, like, "I feel like shit," and I used to, like, walk down the street singing that in my head. I'd be like, "I feel like shit, I feel like shit, I feel like shit," and I can honestly say, like, it's really interesting to reflect back on that because it felt I was like, "Yeah, I guess this is just how life is," to a certain extent. And the thing is I was still party nomming, so it was like, I feel like shit, and so I'm, like, experiencing it without like, as sort of experiential and with curiosity, so I'm not, like, absorbed by it, but I'm like, "Yeah, maybe this is just, like, the state of life." And, turns out it isn't, at least not for now. Yeah. I feel great. I wake up in love with myself, and you can too. Like, this is very possible. It's a very natural state. It's not even expansive. It's just waking up just like, "Woo, beloved. Hello." It's like we get to spend more time together. It's like the thing that you experience with somebody that you love, that you look at them, but it's like it had never occurred to me that you could have that kind of relationship with yourself. I mean, the only reason I experienced if somebody told me, I'd be like, "That sounds kinda convoluted." But as, like, a direct arising experience, it's, like, one of the things about Parinama method, which is that it's, like, part of the thing is, like, what arises just by practicing it. It's not as transactional as saying, like, "I'm gonna say a lot of things that are going to make me more confident," say, for example, or make me I didn't know that these were things, like, this is how you solve for the issues, like, I kept trying to solve them by, like, being more or better or, doing breathing exercises for anxiety and, like, kind of handling things very topically, which is fine as well. Like, I mean, there's part of that is in this as well, as in terms of managing adaptations, but there's kind of a deeper like, the thing is this is, like, such disruptive work, but the depth of where it actually goes to the source, and it's kind of like, "Oh, that's just, like, alleviated." And also, when I feel adaptations, like, pulling me into them, I know what it is. So I know how to kind of move myself out of it. I know, like, I have the tools, or I know how to just be conscious of it and accepting, where it's like, yeah, you just doesn't feel good right now. Like, I feel like shit or you're miserable or whatever. And just to be like, yeah, this is a state of being alive, is this, and to just experience it and not try to shift it even. Just be like, let's watch what it feels like to be miserable. And even that kind of dissolves it to something that's, like, closer to neutral, and neutral being kind of ecstatic, actually. So, anyway, here we are at the final hub, and the key with the, manifestation, and just the key here is that this is the incredibly unsexy hub of essentially, it's kind of like, to a certain extent, it's like just drudgery. It's like it's It's very, like, if you look at the 7th hub as a counterbalance, it's like the 7th hub is, like, expansive, everything's possible, isn't it? It's just and this is where it's like, yeah, you have to kinda, like, drill down and get to work, and you have to exclude things, and you have to make choices, and you have to, like, fulfill commitments, and you have to get real, and you have to, like, really, like, stay with something. This can also be part of a process where it's like you're working in a sort of a drudgery job to save money to be able to start a project or gain some freedom, like this can be the first hub can be the beginning of a process where you go right back up to the 7th hub kind of thing. But so for fulfilling commitments, I'll read here. Once again, it's page 304. So trust is built by consistently fulfilling commitments. What you promise must be delivered, or there needs to be transparent, accountable communication. In this final hub on the descending path, the integrity of delivering on expectations is the grounding and practical complementary counterforce to more expansive upper hubs. As the project descends through the hubs, promises are made, and the vision as originally stated can change. Ignoring this and hoping people forget the commitments and promises you made is tempting because taking responsibility will often be challenging, especially when the stakes can be particularly high. But because so few rise to the challenge, you'll be respected and admired when you do. Even when the news is bad, it's a small world, and you never know when people will pop back into your life. Doing right by others has many benefits. So this is actually, um, like I don't even know, like reading that. I don't know if it like I haven't felt it was particularly clear because there's no examples used, so it's just sort of like the example here is it's real like one of the hardest things about like what I'd call like the fourth hub, the fifth fourth hub, which is like the communication and beginning collaboration, is that like you're still like you've got one foot in the expansive and one foot kind of like in the practical. And the thing is, the expansive feels better because it's all like in retrospectively because it's all like potential and like, oh my god, this could be so big and this could be the biggest thing and this relationship is going to go well. And it's still like it's like you have every possibility and nothing is actually like when you're like pre-execution where you're actually having to deal with like the real world realities of stuff not working or ideas not being the right fit or like not actually being able to collaborate effectively with somebody having different expectations that aren't a match. So it's like the thing about staying in this, like, well, let's not, it's like, let's not put labels on it kind of thing. It's like, well, we'll figure it out as we go along. Like the thing is to at least put like sort of a straw man about kind of like, okay, here's kind of where I'm at. And that can be a thing where it's like, that there's something you want to say or an expectation you want to make that you're kind of like, it just feels like it might kill the vibe if I start talking, about sort of like practical things and even like financial and splits and, where this goes and sort of some of the things I'm concerned about, it's like, and this is like, anyone, I'm sure you have exposure to this, which is like on the backside of something going wrong, realizing that a conversation or some semi-awkward expectation setting can change everything in terms of like the seepage and how expansive an actual like a downstream problem can be from not actually defining things. And sometimes the thing is you'll kill the vibe immediately. You'll say, "Well, here's what I think," and the person will go, "Yeah, no." Or they'll be mad. I've had people be mad, and it's like, isn't it and the thing is it could initially, it doesn't feel good. It's not like, "Oh, this is great," but it's also great because you're figuring something out that you would have been building off a false platform. So to have somebody just go, "Yeah, that's not what I wanna do." It's kinda like, the example of like, it's like marrying somebody and being like, maybe they'll change their mind. They mentioned they don't wanna have kids, maybe they'll change their mind, because 'cause they'll be, like, so in love with our life together, and so it's like, maybe, they might. So sometimes maybe you don't say things and it's not gonna be a disaster, but in my experience, there's usually some kind of fallout and, like, dilution of trust and, yeah, like, dilution of, like, connection and trust, and you see this with a lot of founders, especially, like, tech companies, where their relationship is so strained in the times where they really need to be working together, there's so much resentment, and they're, like, hanging on by a thread, like, they literally are almost like mortal enemies. It happens a lot. You just don't see it because they, like, hold it together. If you're on the outside, you don't see it because 'cause they're kinda, like, holding together for appearances because they realize what's at stake, that they have to work through, but how absolutely painful this is where you have, where the lines of communication, the expectation setting, and the commitments aren't even made, about, like, what the expectations are. So, we're talking about both making commitments earlier and fulfilling the ones that we make when we sort of actually, one of the things I'd say is that by not making commitments, you do make commitments. Like, when you're kinda like, "Look, we'll figure it out as we go along." In the first hub, that's where you pay up for that one way or the other. So it's another so it's not you're making commitments regardless of whether they're stated or not, and it's just whether you actually, like, realize you're making the same ones to each other, so that can also be a reconciliation. So the exercise for this is to make a list of commitments you've made and build a plan with a timeline of how you'll either deliver or communicate expectations. If you have incomplete projects in your personal life, make a list of them and complete them. Having the distraction of things left undone is a subtle subconscious bother that steals focus and energy. Yeah, I mean, this can even be like going through your inbox and like replying to emails, like just as an example of responding to people that you've put off for, like, and just saying, look, you've got chat GPT, you've got Google. It's like, okay, what's a good way to, respond to an email that you've left sitting for 6 months? Like ask for help or, like just figuring out how to get this stuff done. Cause it actually, it like holds, like it's like, it has a, like, negative grounding. It's like it's as ballast. It's like holding back. But the other thing is, like, the projects around the house. If you've, like, unfinished things, if you have a bag of clothing that needs to go to Goodwill, a bunch of things, like, a couple repairs that need to be made, a little paint fixer up, little like, just getting in, just send that message to yourself of completion, of not just a bunch of, like, hanging obligations that are just not fully completed. There's a lot more on that in chapter 4. This is like first hub stuff. So anyway, so that's it. That's it for today. Special shout out to Kristen. Special shout out to Mira. I just want to give a very particular shout out. Like I just have to say that it's really it means so much to me that you take the time to listen to these. Yeah. It's really an honor. And it's like it really, like, the intention of so much of this and, like, really a lot of it was, like, this, like, loving intention of putting this out in the world, and, as I've learned, it was about a love, it was putting and this is actually kind of a thing where it's, like, sometimes, like, the self-love, the thing of, like, loving yourself starts with, like, putting it out there, because it's, like, through doing that, that I actually found the, the once again, the greatest love of all. So, sharing in this love and my greatest hope is that these can ultimately be discussions where I'm hearing from you about your thoughts on this and your experiences with it or your additions to it or your detractions from it or that's been one of the great joys is that where people send me messages or also send me things like here's a thing I'm working on or this is a thing I found that's helping with this where you're building your own parinama toolkit. So it's like you're building it and using the hubs as sort of a organizing principle to like really place where and be able to like manage the experience of being alive by placing the tools you have with the specific centers of like it's like with is it love, is it with like is it the first hub with power and identity and autonomy, is it in feeling and emotion and desire and enjoyment in the second hub. So it's kind of like being like okay, like when we get just more effective in being able to like sort of operate and manage ourselves in this kind of dynamic active way. So anyway, thank you so much, and all interaction with this is so welcome. As always, if you don't want to put anything in the public comments, just feel free to DM me at the Parinama Method Instagram, or if you know me personally, you reach out to me. Yeah. I love hearing what's going on in your process. I absolutely do. It's like it's an honor, honestly. The truth is it's truly an honor. And yeah, I'm looking forward to finishing this up. There's probably 2 more sessions. I think physical symbol, and then I'll do a session that is for like the wrap up of the book and talk through some of the points of that, which there's some stuff in there that's kind of like funny and the bibliography and how that was created and all that stuff. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Bye for now.